Hey, this is Jennifer and Megan. We are two sisters from South Carolina on a mission to discover more about our British grandmother's life in London by reading, researching, and sharing her love letters she wrote during World War II. If you're looking for an interesting, unique perspective on life, love, and London during World War II, then you have found the right place. We will take you through each letter and bring them to life as we have recently traveled to some of the exact places mentioned in these letters. Think of this as a historic love story come to life. So grab your favorite beverage and blanket and prepare to dive in with us. This is the All My Love, Lucy podcast. Hey, and welcome back to the All My Love, Lucy podcast. We're so glad you're here for episode number 3.
We want to always express our gratitude for the love and support from everyone, so thank you all so much. We are truly grateful, and we are having such a wonderful time with this podcast.
We are, and for those who may be first-time listeners, we want to encourage you to go back and start at episode number 1 to catch up on all the information. This podcast is more like a series, so it's kind of hard to just jump in unless you start at number 1. So we encourage you to go back to that.
Now, we will say it seems that at the time of this third letter that Lucy and Jimmie still do not realize that they will be apart for a whole 2 years, but they do know that they'll be apart longer than they originally expected.
And as a reminder, we always have a complete, uninterrupted letter at the end of each episode, so be sure to stick around for that. So let's get started with letter number 3.
June 14th, 1944. Jimmie, darling, I expect you will be surprised to hear from me again, but I had such a lovely dream about you last night, so I thought it would be an excuse to send you an extra letter. Are you pleased, sweetheart?
Ugh, isn't that the worst? Like, you have a dream, you wake up, you've had a lovely dream, and then you wake up and reality hits.
Oh, yes.
And you realize you're away from the person, you're by yourself. That would have to be awful for her. And so that had to make her feel an even greater longing for him. And I kind of wish she would have detailed the dream. Tell us about what she was dreaming about. And
she goes on to say, this week I'm on holiday at home, and how I wish you were with me. Monday, I looked at the shops, bought some knitting yarn, and started knitting a jumper.
So a jumper would have been a sweater or a sweater vest. And to me, she says she was on holiday, but that doesn't sound like holiday to me. That sounds like work. Have you ever knitted?
No, I haven't knitting there.
Grandma Lucy was an avid knitter, and she enjoyed it a lot. She tried to teach me, and I learned the basics. Like, I could knit a small pot holder. That was and I got to work in it a little bit more, but I was never really good at it. But she was really good at it, and she enjoyed it. And in my young, I guess, American mind, I would think it was so strange that she would knit things that we could just buy at the store. But,
yeah.
Why is she doing that? That's just taking forever. Why is she doing that? And so it was a lot of work, but I really could tell that she enjoyed doing it. And so I'm sure during the time of this letter, her resources would have been slim, and undoubtedly it would have helped pass the time. And it was probably also cheaper to make something than to go buy it in a store somewhere. But knitting was an essential part of life for many women in London during World War II. It provided both a necessity and a welcome distraction, a creative distraction from the stress of the wartime going on. And another really awesome discovery about knitting during this time is how it played a part with the women helping with the war efforts. I thought this was a really cool story.
Oh, yeah, I did too. I couldn't believe it.
Yeah, it's hard to imagine knitting being used as a weapon. And but it was, and it's not because of the needles. But we know the power of secret codes being hidden in ordinary items. This is actually called steganography, if I'm saying that right. And it's used to pass detailed messages right under the noses of the adversary through ordinary items. So what the women would do is these knitters would hide coded messages in different stitches they would knit, And the patterns of those stitches would serve as messages, kind of like Morse code. So they would knit something that would appear as innocent looking as a sweater and pass it along to an undercover agent who could read the message. And most of the soldiers were not knitters, so they wouldn't notice anything unusual about it. And since knitting was such a common practice, as Lucy mentioned she was doing here during the war, even on holiday, she was doing it. Even with the more advancements in long distance communications technologies, knitting was still the perfect cover, and women could do this in broad daylight without raising any suspicions. So they would call on like elderly women who lived near the trains that were passing by, and they would, I read some stories about how they would get them to, while they were knitting, they would do an odd stitch every time they saw like the Germans go by with artillery or something. And so they would use it. It's really, really, really fascinating story about how knitting was used like that.
Mm-hmm.
But there's a really, really good story. I won't go into great detail about Phyllis Latour Doyle, if I'm saying her name correctly. Really awesome story. She is a well-known British spy, and she used this method of knitting to send codes during the war. And it's a great story about her. So I encourage you to look it up and read about what she did.
And we actually have a little surprise.
It's a big surprise for me.
Our grandmother Lucy made this blanket for you, right?
Yeah, she made one for me and one for Stacy, our older sister, and that was on my bed when I was a child. I can't remember how old we were when she knitted those for us, but I thought they were gone. I thought they had gotten misplaced or tossed away into the Goodwill, or I don't know. I didn't know where it went. But she showed up to my house with this blanket, and I was in shock and so, so excited. But she knitted this blanket. This is just one of the things that she would knit her sweaters. She knitted a lot. She was a really good knit.
Oh, yeah. It's super warm.
I love it. I love it. Love it. I'm so excited about it. Thank you for bringing it. I'm so excited about it.
I thought it'd be fun to show everybody just a little something that she.
It is. It is. That's wonderful. Perfect.
She goes on to say, yesterday I went to the pictures and saw Fanny by Gaslight, which was quite good.
I started watching this movie and I forgot to finish it. I rented it. It's on Amazon Prime if anyone wants to watch it, but I started to. But this movie was one of the biggest hits that year in 1944 and also one of the most popular British films of all time. On the contrary, it was originally banned in the U.S. because of the Hays Purity Code. Did you read about that? That's a whole other topic. Of course, I'm not going to go real deep into that because that would take a long time. But in a nutshell, it was a purity code that prohibited profanity and things like that from being in the movies on television. It included profanity irreverently using God, Jesus Christ, and Lord. It prohibited nudity, drug trafficking, sexual perversion, scenes of childbirth, and more. Several other ones, but because of there's a brothel portrayed in this movie, Fanny by Gaslight. It violated the Hays Code here in the U.S., and the movie's release in the U.S. was delayed for 3 years. But how times have changed.
Yeah, really.
So I thought that was kind of an interesting fact about that movie. Also, we could not find which theater location the movie was played at in London that year, but I'm hoping we can eventually. We'll probably have to talk to an expert in the theater situation because a lot of the theaters, I believe, are no longer there. But I would love to know where the theaters were that she went to because she went often, as we hear about in these letters. I imagine it was probably somewhere in Piccadilly Circus, but we don't know for sure.
She goes on to say, and today I saw a show, The Lisbon Story. The music was good, and of course, my only regret was that you were not sitting beside me. I do not need to tell you that I went by myself because that's the way it is with me.
So, The Lisbon Story was a British musical that ran for 493 performances at the London Hippodrome, if I'm saying that correctly, from 1943 to 1944. And the London Hippodrome is located in the city of Westminster, London, and famously, Tchaikovsky's Swan Lake held its English premiere there in 1910. Today, the Hippodrome is still there and is actually a casino now. And we will surely visit that on our next London trip, right?
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm ready for that.
But it was really it's changed several different it's been a theater, and then it had like a big like an equestrian area for a long time. So it's a pretty famously historic place in London.
Mm. She goes on to say, "Oh, darling, I bought a rose, which I wore on my coat, specially to send to you. It has a lovely perfume and a big kiss inside for you, so I hope it won't get lost in the post."
Did you know we had this?
I know we have a few of them, right?
Yeah. So this rose that she's talking about, we have it here. If you're watching it on video, you can see it there. That's the rose that she put in the letter and kissed and sprayed a little perfume on. That is so sweet. So I'll show it one more time. And then I guess she put some foil around the bottom of it there, I guess to try to keep it alive while it was in the mail or something.
Oh, no.
Or maybe just to keep it from poking through or something.
Mm-hmm.
But we do have several of those. We know from her next letter, and I'm getting a spoiler alert, but we know from her next letter she talks about it being a red rose. So that was a red rose. Mm-hmm. Which here is another example of florography that we talked about before in the previous letters. And I thought about this too. I forgot to mention this when we talked about it before. But have you watched that show, The Lost Flowers of Alice Hart, on Amazon Prime? Have you not watched it? Okay, it's Sigourney Weaver and I can't remember the other girl's name. But that they heavily rely on florography in that movie.
Really?
Yeah, and they'll have not just one flower, but they'll have bouquets of flowers and to say a whole message.
Mm-hmm.
So instead of just saying like red roses, of course, mean love, and you're the only one for me, and that sort of thing. But in that show, it demonstrates how you can send like a whole like paragraph, basically, message to someone. So
Wow.
it's kind of a rough show. So, you might want to, get the reviews and check it out before you watch it. But it's interesting to say the least.
She goes on to say, "I wish I were coming too, but darling, judging from the way you are all fighting, the war will soon be over. But don't think that when I say that I underestimate what a stupendous task you all have, but each day brings us nearer to victory and to the time when we shall be together."
Now, again, I know we've said this before, but we want to say it again. We are not World War II experts at all. But as mentioned in the last letter, she's certainly referring to the D-Day invasion here, also known as Operation Overlord, which started on June 6, 1944, with the Allied forces storming the beaches of Normandy, France. And while this signaled an end of the war in Europe, London still faced a lot of devastation to come. And we'll talk more about that later as Lucy details some of this in her future letters, and it's really interesting. But we don't want to jump ahead to that yet. That will come soon enough. But overall, there would have been a sense here of her, thinking that the war was coming to an end, that they were going to be together, an expectation of them being reunited soon. But sadly, we know this took a lot longer than they realized. And I'm sure when she turned on the radio or, read newspapers or whatever, she would be kind of on the edge of her seat, just waiting, thinking, that every victory was going to bring them closer to being together.
"Well, my darling sweetheart, keep smiling and write to me soon. Every time I hear the postman, my heart goes thump, and I rush to see if there's another letter from you. And when there is not, I think all sorts of wicked things about the censor for holding your letter back.
That darn censor. She gets frustrated about that. But this is kind of a roller coaster of emotions here to me. It makes me feel that anticipation because, we've all been waiting on something in the mail. And every time we hear a car go down the road, we look to see if, see if the mailman's come. And we've all been waiting on something. And when it doesn't come, we're like, we have that frustration of, really got to wait a whole other day to see if it's going to come. But and then how she gets angry and frustrated when there wouldn't be anything for her, and how mad she'd be about the censor. As we saw how she gets frustrated, well, she mentions the censor, I think in the first letter.
First letter.
So there's just an ongoing sense of, I guess, animosity towards the censor.
It made me so happy to know you are always contented when you are with me. Darling, although I never knew how to tell you with words, I always felt contented too, and I hadn't a care in the world whenever you were with me because you made me feel so happy.
That just seems like such a profound statement for her to say she didn't have a care in the world when they were together, considering all that was going on around them with the war. That just, to me, just seems like such a profound statement. But this sheds some more light on how heartbroken she must have been by being apart, because if he made her feel safe and contented, then being apart from him, she must have felt really lonely and probably a little bit afraid. So.
I am so proud of you and love you so very much. I would like 100 kisses this very moment. What do you say? Professor J would have 40 fits, but I wouldn't care.
And we have no idea who this Professor J is that she's referring to, so we think it's probably an inside joke between the two of them.
She ends her letter with, "Good night, darling, and happy dreams until we meet again. With all my love, from your Lucy." And this is actually one of my favorite parts of all of her letters. She doesn't do the traditional XOXO like we're used to. She does all X's, and she normally puts maybe like 6 or 7 in her letters. And it was very common for the British to put just the X's, the kisses, in their letters instead of.
Oh, okay. That's interesting. I've seen it, but I've never really looked into it or thought that much about it. So that's neat.
Yeah. And then at the end, she says, "Here's a special one," and then she leaves another X. And then at the very end, she says, "P.S. I expect you'll be curious when you see this bulging letter." And ends it with an X as well.
And that would be because that flower right there would have been in the envelope. That's talking about the bulging letter. It's probably, what in the world is in that one?
Can you believe how old that is? It's got to be over 100 years old, right?
No, 1944.
Close. This got to be close. Close to 100.
Almost, yeah. In 2044, it'll be 100 years old. 20 more years. 20 more years, it'll be 100. That's 80.
I should say it's close to 80 years old.
No, we have that perfectly. Yeah, it's 80 years old this year. I'm slinging it around like I'm just gonna
an 80-year-old road.
Yeah, that's super cool. I love that we have that. I love that she did that. That's one of my favorite parts is that.
Mine too.
She sent flowers and things. So we continue on this journey with Grandma Lucy as she details her life and longing and hardships while she waits to be reunited with the love of her life, Jimmie. So don't miss any of our upcoming episodes as we discover more and more about this beautiful love story. And in the next letter, Lucy gives a little more insight as to where Jimmie was stationed.
Oh, I'm excited to find out. If some of you didn't know, this is our first time reading some of these letters. We have read a few, but there are so many. So I actually do not know where he was stationed next. So I'm excited to find out.
Yeah, so stay tuned and make sure you subscribe to our channels. Hit that like button, leave us some comments and reviews, and share with your friends.
And again, we want to thank y'all so much for joining us and hanging out with us. We truly hope you've enjoyed this episode.
And as promised, we will end with an uninterrupted reading of this letter. So until next time, enjoy. June 14th, 1944. Jimmie, darling, I expect you will be surprised to hear from me again, but I had such a lovely dream about you last night, so I thought it would be an excuse to send you an extra letter. Are you pleased, sweetheart? This week I am on holiday at home, and how I wish you were with me. Monday, I looked at the shops, bought some knitting yarn, and started knitting a jumper. Yesterday, I went to the pictures and saw Fanny by Gaslight, which was quite good. And today, I saw a show, The Lisbon Story. The music was good, and of course, my only regret was that you were not sitting beside me. I don't need to tell you that I went by myself because that's the way it is with me. Oh, darling, I bought a rose which I wore on my coat, especially to send to you. It has a lovely perfume and a big kiss inside for you, so I hope it won't get lost in the post. I wish I were coming too, but darling, judging from the way you all are fighting, the war will soon be over. But don't think when I say that I underestimate what a stupendous task you all have, but each day brings us nearer to victory and to the time when we shall be together. Well, my darling, keep smiling and write to me soon. Every time I hear the postman, my heart goes thump, and I'll rush to see if there's another letter from you. And when there's not, I think all sorts of wicked things about the Censor for holding your letter back. It made me so happy to know you were always contented when you were with me. Darling, although I never knew how to tell you with words, I always felt contented too, and I hadn't a care in the world whenever you were with me because you made me feel so happy. I am so proud of you and love you so very much. I would like 100 kisses this very moment. What do you say? Professor J would have 40 fits, but I wouldn't care. Good night, darling, and happy dreams until we meet again. With all my love, from your Lucy. And here's a special one. P.S. I expect you will be curious when you see this bulging letter. If you are hearing this message, you've listened to the entire episode, and for that, we want to thank you from the bottom of our hearts. We truly hope you enjoyed this episode, and we hope you'll return for the next episode of the All My Love Lucy podcast.